Wyoming Territory, June of 1883, and the high plains country was running green from a wet spring, and the wind came off the bighorns, carrying the smell of snowmelt and sage. The station at Wold County was a single building of weathered pine with one bench on the platform and a hitching rail that had seen better years. The 2:15 train from Laramie came in 23 minutes late, pulling hard up the grade, and when it stopped, a woman was the first person down the steps. She was a small woman, made smaller by the size of her carpet bag and by the way she held herself, like a person who had learned not to take up space. She wore a navy traveling dress that had been let out at the seams, and her hair was pinned careful and high. And she had the particular kind of stillness that comes from a long journey and no certainty about the end of it. She looked around the platform. She was looking for Calvin Hollister, whom she had been writing to for 4 months, whom she had never seen, whom she had agreed to marry sight unseen because her father had agreed to let her go. What she saw instead was a tall man of 31 years, built lean and dark, with his left arm held close to his ribs in a way that suggested the ribs did not always appreciate being touched. His hat was pulled low. His mouth was set in a way that suggested it did not often come untied. Beck Hollister stood at the far end of the platform and gathered himself the way a man gathers himself before walking into a river he knows is cold. "Miss Iris?" he said. "Yes," she set down the carpet bag. "Where is Mr. Hollister?" Beck opened his mouth. He closed it. He had ridden 10 miles into town, thinking about how not to say the thing he had come to say, and there was no path through it. "Ma'am," he said, "I am Beck Hollister. I am Calvin's brother. Calvin, my brother, he passed 3 days ago. Pneumonia, the doctor was here and then he was not, and then—" He stopped. He started again. "He is not at the ranch. I am sorry for it." The woman did not move. She was looking past him at the empty platform. "He wrote to me on the 19th of May, she said. Her voice was very steady and very small. "He wrote that he was looking forward to meeting me at last. He wrote that he had built an addition to the house, and that he had planted willows by the well, because I had mentioned in a letter that I loved willows. He did plant those," Beck said. "Ma'am, I am sorry. I am very sorry." She looked at him then. She looked at his dark face, and his careful posture, and his eyes that were too old for the rest of him, and she saw, for the first time in her life, what a man looked like when he was standing in the middle of something he could not fix. She sat down on the bench, very slowly. Beck did not know what to do. He stood on the platform for what felt like a very long time, and then he sat down beside her, leaving about 2 feet of empty bench between them, because he did not know if she would want him near. "I have sold everything I own to get here," she said. "I have taken the smallest job in my father's house, work he did not want to offer me, and I have done it for 4 months. And I have sold a piece of jewelry that belonged to my mother, and I have borrowed from a woman in town, and I have saved every cent." She looked at her hands. "I had no other place to go." Beck Hollister listened to this and understood, with the slow-spreading understanding of a man who has done something terrible by accident, that this woman had staked her entire survival on a man who would never hold her hand. He said, "Stay anyway." She looked at him. "I do not have a husband for you," Beck said. "I do not have what you were promised. What I have is a house and a ranch and work enough for 2 people and no one to help me do it. I can offer you a place to sleep and food and wages. You would not be a guest. You would work and you would be paid." He stopped. "He said it, and if you wanted to leave, I would take you to the station and I would not ask you a question the whole way." Iris looked at this man who looked like he had been put together wrong, and who was offering her, with perfect plainness, the only thing she had actually needed the whole time. which was not a husband, but a choice. Yes, she said. They left the platform as the sun was going down, and by the time they reached the ranch, the light was the color of old copper. And she saw the house Calvin had built, the addition, the willows by the well, the porch where a man had planned to sit with a woman he would never meet. The house was bigger than she had imagined, and it was lonelier than that. Beck showed her the room that Calvin had prepared for her, the bed with a good tick, the small table with a lamp, a mirror nailed above a washstand, a single window that looked out onto the river bending south through a stand of cottonwoods. Calvin's handwriting was on a piece of paper nailed to the bedpost. "This room is yours." Beck left her there. He did not ask her to help with supper. He did not ask her anything at all. He made her a meal, beans and salt pork and biscuits, and set it on the table, and then went out, and she sat alone in the kitchen of a house built for a marriage that would never happen and tried to eat something. She could not. Instead, she cleared the plates and washed them and dried them and looked at the kitchen for signs of Calvin and found only the absence of him. A bachelor's kitchen. A kitchen that had been waiting and was now waiting for something else. In the morning, Beck was already gone. She heard the horses from the corral being worked and the voice of another man, younger than Beck, laughing. She found fresh water in the pail by the stove and kindling laid ready, and bacon in the cold box. And she made breakfast for 2 men she did not know. When they came in, the younger one was shocked. Beck was not shocked, but he was grateful in a way that was almost painful to see. "I am earning wages," she said. "I will work. The barn needs mucking," the younger man, whose name was Emmett, said. And then Beck gave him a look that could have filed edges, and Emmett looked at his biscuit instead. "The garden needs tending," Beck said. "The vegetable garden behind the house. It went to seed last year. If you wanted to work it, we would eat a good deal better." So she worked the garden. She worked it from the first day of June, through all of June and into July, and by the end of that time she had reclaimed 9 rows of it, and she had grown things, beans and squash and late lettuce and herbs, sage and thyme and marjoram, that filled the whole back corner with their smell. Beck would come out in the evening sometimes. He would stand at the edge of the worked ground and watch her work, and he did not speak, and she did not speak, and there was something in that silence that was different from the silence of the house itself. The silence of the house was grief. The silence between them was something else. It had not got a name yet. One evening, about 6 weeks after she arrived, Beck came out to the garden with a length of good cedar he had been saving, and he began to build her a gate, not because it was needed, but because it was something to do that was not just working. It took him 3 evenings. On the 3rd evening, his left arm gave out on him about halfway through, and he sat down hard on the fence rail, and she saw him bite his lip, and she brought water without being asked, and he drank it without thanking her, which was its own kind of thanks. When the gate was finished, it was one of the finest things on the ranch. She walked through it every day for the rest of the summer. The life of the ranch settled into a rhythm that had nothing to do with mourning and everything to do with the simple work of keeping things alive. Beck rose before dawn. He worked the horses, fixed fence, managed the hands. There were 3 of them, including Emmett, and they worked hard. Because Beck worked harder. He came in for a meal at noon and a meal in the evening, and both times Iris was waiting with food that got better as the summer wore on. She learned what he liked. She learned that he took coffee black, and that he preferred bread that was dark, and that on Thursdays he ate pie, because it was the thing his mother used to make, which meant, though he never said it, that Thursday was a hard day. One Thursday in July, she made him a pie. It was not perfect. The crust was too thick on one side and the filling was too thick on the other. She set it on the table in front of him and said nothing. Beck looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he cut a piece and ate it, and he said, "How did you know? About the Thursday pies?" "About my mother. I have not spoken of her to anyone." Iris did not answer him, because the answer was that she had been listening to the silence, the way some people listen to voices. There were other moments. There was the morning Beck came in favoring his left side worse than usual. And she did not ask him what had happened. She had learned not to ask the questions he did not want to answer. But she brought him the good whiskey from the shelf and set a towel over his shoulder, and he let her see the place where the scar pulled and twisted when the weather was changing. It was a bad scar. It pulled from his collarbone down toward his ribs in a shape like a lightning strike. "Horse fell on me," he said, 4 years ago. I was younger and I was stupid. He lived. I did not quite die. She did not touch it. She only looked at it the way a person looks at something that took a long time to heal. Then there was the evening Iris came out to the corral and found Beck working with the black Mustang they had caught in May. A horse that would not let anyone near it, that had killed a man's arm once, that nobody thought would ever be gentle. Beck was standing very still, about 6 feet away from the horse, just looking at it. He was not holding a rope, he was not holding anything at all. He stood like that for an hour. The horse stood there. Sometimes it moved. Beck did not. On the second evening of this, Iris brought water and sat on the rail and did not speak, and just at the moment the sun was going down, the horse walked up behind Beck and put its nose against the back of his neck. Beck did not move. The horse stayed there for 3 breaths, and then it walked away, and Beck came off the rail and came to her and said, "He knows I do not want to hurt him." "Yes," she said, "that is something, I suppose." "It is everything," she said. And Beck Hollister, who had not believed anything was everything for a very long time, sat down beside her on the fence rail and did not get up again until the light was gone and the stars had come out over the high plains, and by then something had shifted in him. A bone that had been dislocated for years finding its way back toward its socket. Not healed, but heading that direction. Before the world came up that river road with intentions that were not kind, and it was coming, it had already saddled and started. There were a few more weeks of this, and if you have stayed with these two this far, stay a while longer. What happens next is the part that changes everything. And if you find yourself moved by tales of love that survived the worst the West could throw at it, the bell beneath this story is how we go on meeting like this. Harrison Pike was a big man with a red face and a ledger book in which he wrote down all the reasons that other people were failing. He owned the land east of the Hollister Ranch and the land west of it, and he held paper on 3 other ranches besides. And he had learned that the way to make money was not to work hard, but to wait for other people to work hard, and then to wait for them to be tired, and then to call in the note. He had held paper on the Hollister Ranch for 7 years, a $500 loan, very reasonable terms, due on demand if the note holder should decide to demand it. Calvin Hollister had been very reliable. He had paid on time. He had been a man of standing in the county. Beck Hollister was something else. Beck Hollister was a man who worked hard and said nothing and did not go to town, and thus was a man about whom very little was known, which meant a man about whom very much could be said. Harrison Pike heard, at the saloon in Wald County, that there was a woman at the Hollister Ranch. He heard, from a man who knew a man, that she had come as a mail-order bride for Calvin, and that Calvin was dead, and that Beck had taken her in anyway. He heard that she was small and quiet and kept to herself, which meant she was isolated, which meant she was vulnerable, which meant she was leverage. On the last day of July, Harrison Pike rode up to the Hollister Ranch on a fine horse and waited on the porch until Beck came in from the north pasture. "Beck," he said, "I come on business." Beck did not invite him in. He stood in the doorway and waited. "Your note," said Harrison Pike, "has been held by my family for 7 years. Calvin was a man of standing. I respected Calvin. You I do not know." Pike opened a leather folder. "I have decided that I am calling the note due. $500 due on the 1st of September, or I take the land." Beck was very still. "You cannot sell enough horses between now and September to cover it," Pike said. And he said it like a man delivering good news. "You are going to have to sell this ranch. Unless you have cash I do not know about, or a woman with a family fortune, you are going to lose everything you have." Beck looked at him. Then he looked past him at Iris, who had come to the doorway of the kitchen, and he saw her go pale, and he understood, with the slow drop of a stone into a deep well, that she was afraid of him, afraid that he would blame her, that he would regret the choice he had made to let her stay. "I heard you on the 19th, Pike said, "and I heard you had her working in the garden like a field hand. A mail-order bride should not have to work. You are a cruel man, Beck Hollister. I am not surprised that you would work a desperate woman." "Get off my land," Beck said. "1st of September, Pike said." And he rode away. Beck came inside and found Iris at the stove, working on supper with her movements very small and very careful, the way a person moves when they are trying not to break. "This is not your burden," he said. "You came here to marry my brother. You did not come here to lose everything with a man you did not choose." "No," Iris said. "I came here to marry a man I had never met, based on lies in a letter. I stayed here because you made a choice. I am still here because I made one." She set down the spoon. "What do you owe him?" $500, due in 5 weeks. "It is not possible." "Then we sell something." "There is nothing to sell except the ranch itself, and if I sell that, I have nothing to offer you either." And Iris turned to him then and said, very clearly, "I did not stay for the offering. I stayed for the choice." She told him the truth in pieces, the way truth comes out when a person has been quiet for a very long time. It happened over 3 evenings, sitting on the fence by the corral, watching the black Mustang that had learned to trust Beck learn, slowly, to trust the fact of her as well. "My father was a telegraph operator in Nebraska," she said on the first evening. "He was a careful man and a kind man until he was not. My mother died when I was 12, and after that he drank the careful out of himself and left only the man who was angry at the world. He remarried a woman named Constance, who was worse than him." Beck listened. He did not speak. "My father decided that I was an expense. He put an advertisement in a matrimonial paper. I did not know this. He did it without my permission, and when Calvin Hollister answered, my father said yes. And he said it for reasons I have only recently understood. Calvin was not a man my father chose for my future. Calvin was a man my father chose to get me out of his house." She stopped. "So I wrote to Calvin, and Calvin wrote back. And I decided that I would be glad to marry a stranger because a stranger was better than staying with my father. I packed my things, and I borrowed money, and I left, and I was so grateful for it I could have wept." Beck said, "And then you arrived to find he was dead." "Yes, and I had no money left, and nowhere to go, and no way home. And I was thinking about whether I could walk to the next town and find work as a laundress, and then a man with a broken shoulder and a scar on his side offered me a choice, and I took it because it was the only one being offered." She looked at him. "I do not regret it." On the second evening she listened while he told her about the horse that had fallen on him, which had been a breaking of something he did not know how to mend, which had made him slow with people, which had made him careful, which had made him afraid that anything he loved would know it and leave. My brother loved me, Beck said. Calvin, he raised me after our father drank himself to death. He worked hard, and he made something, and he wanted me to have a share in something good. Then he got sick, and I sat beside his bed, and I waited for him to stop, and when he stopped I had to go to town and tell a stranger that the thing we had both been working for was gone. He stopped. He said, "And then you came anyway. You stayed. And I was afraid to want that because I was afraid it would break the same way as everything else." "Does it seem like it is breaking?" Iris said. Beck looked at her in the gathering dark, at her small face and her steady eyes, and he said, "No, it seems like it is becoming something. It seems like it is becoming mine." And Iris reached over and took his hand, the right one, the whole one, the one that had never been broken, and held it the way a person holds something they do not plan to let go of. "It has been yours," she said, "since the platform at Wold County. Since the moment you said, 'Stay anyway.'" The barn caught fire on the 28th of August, which was 3 days before the note was due, and it caught fire from the northeast corner where the loose hay was, which is not where a barn catches by accident. Beck was in the house when he saw the smoke, and he was outside in 3 seconds, and the whole north end was already going, the flame running up the inside of the wall and out under the eave. The horses knew. They were screaming. Emmett was already working the corral gates, and Iris was already there in her nightdress with her shawl wrapped around her, and she was already moving. She went to the back of the barn and got under the smoke line, and she started leading horses out, one by one, just using her voice and her hand and the steady knowledge that the animals would follow her if she did not panic. Beck worked the front. He got the big geldings out and the young stock, and one of the breeding mares, and then he went back in for the Mustang, the black one that had learned slowly to trust him, and that is when the loft came down. It caught him across the left shoulder and the left arm both, and it pinned him there in the hay and the smoke, and he could have lain there, and he could have let it end. But he did not. He pushed. He got himself out from under the weight of the beam, and he walked, he limped, out of the barn dragging the Mustang by the halter with his arm on fire and his breath tearing, and Iris was there, and she pulled him the last 20 feet clear, and the whole roof came down behind them in a column of sparks that they felt on their skin, and saw for 15 miles across the high plains. Emmett got the doctors. Beck had a broken arm, the left one, already broken and healed wrong, now broken again and healed wrong a second time, and a burn across the shoulder blade that looked like somebody had laid a hot hand on him and held it there, and enough smoke in him to keep him fevered for 4 days. Iris did not leave his side for 3 of them. She cleaned the burn with clean water and cloth she boiled herself, and she got broth into him, and she sat through the night with her hand on his good shoulder and listened to him talk to men who had been dead for years, and to his brother Calvin, who had been kind to him, who had loved him, who had left him with a stranger and an impossible debt, and a reason to stay alive anyway. On the morning of the 31st, there was a knock on the door. It was Harrison Pike, and he had brought the sheriff, and they had brought paperwork, because a fire does not stop a note, and a fire does not stop a man from collecting what is owed to him. Pike stood in the bedroom doorway and looked at Beck broken and burned, and he looked at Iris standing between him and the bed, and he smiled the smile of a man who has found the very moment he was looking for. "The note is due," Pike said. "Today, I have waited long enough, and I have been patient, and I have given you every opportunity. I am taking the ranch. I will be generous. I will allow you to remove your personal items, and the woman can go with you, though her working off the debt elsewhere would settle some of what you owe me. And Iris said, "No." Everyone stopped. "No," Iris said again. Her voice was very quiet and very clear. "You do not own this land." "I do." Pike looked at her like she had spoken in a language he did not know. "Calvin Hollister wrote me a letter," Iris said. She had it in her hand, a piece of paper that had been hidden in the pillow cover since the morning Beck lay down with the smoke in his lungs. He wrote it on the 18th of May, which was the day before he died. He wrote it knowing he was dying. I did not know that until now. But the letter says so. He wrote that if anything happened to him, I should know that he had changed his will, and that the ranch was to go to me. Because he had never met me, but he had learned from his letters that I was capable and that I was brave. And because he wanted his brother to have a chance at a life that did not cost him everything. She held up the letter. I did not understand what this meant when I first read it. I did not even know it was in this house. But Beck has kept every piece of Calvin's things, and he kept this. She looked at Beck, who was looking at the letter like it had rewritten something fundamental in his understanding of what his brother had been. "The ranch is in my name now. The will was filed with the county. I brought the papers from my traveling case this morning and I sent Emmett to town to verify it, and he has just returned." Pike's face had gone the color of tallow. "You cannot," he said. "I can," Iris said. "And I own the land free. I have been working for wages for 3 months. I have been saving. I have every dollar you asked for, Mr. Pike. I am paying off the note today." She set the money on the bedside table. Cash, real money, counted and tied with a string. "The other 400 remains," Pike said, though he was already backing toward the door. "And it will be paid," Iris said. "But not to you, because I am calling in the notes you hold on 3 other ranches, the families who will gladly sign over to me what they owe you, because they would rather owe me. And I am paying you off, and you are leaving my land, and you are never coming back." Pike left. Beck's arm healed the second time in a sling for 3 months. And when he finally unwrapped it, it was still crooked and still scarred, but it was his own, and he could use it, and that seemed like all the grace a man could ask for. By October, the barn was being rebuilt by men from 3 ranches over, because word had gone around about a woman who had saved the horses and a man who had walked through fire to save a horse. And people in that country understood what that meant. By November, Iris and Beck were married at the river bend under a sky so clear and so blue it looked like the whole world had been scoured clean. The Reverend came out from town in a wagon, and Emmett stood as witness, and the whole county came with wagons and food. Because that was what they did when something good happened after something bad. She wore a simple dress of white cotton that she had sewn herself, and he wore a shirt that she had stitched, and when the Reverend asked for her name, Beck answered for her. "Iris. Her name is Iris." And he said it like a man who had been given the one thing he did not know he was allowed to ask for. A year later, there was a child on the way and a new house being built out beyond the ranch, and the black Mustang had had 2 foals, and there was a photograph taken in the town of Wold County showing a man with his arm around a woman, and both of them looking at something just beyond the camera's reach. The future, maybe. Or the fact that they had been allowed to have one. And in a box on the shelf above the stove, there were 3 letters. The one Calvin had written to Iris before he died. The ones Beck and Iris had written to each other in the months after the fire, when one of them was healing and the other was learning to trust that healing could actually mean something besides breaking all over again. The letter from Calvin was brought out sometimes and read aloud, and what it said was this: "If you are reading this, it means I did not live to meet you. But I want you to know that in reading your letters and writing to a stranger, I learned that there is bravery in that, the bravery to hope for something you have never seen. My brother is a better man than I ever was. If you want him, take him. If he wants you, let him. The ranch is yours. Because a woman brave enough to travel to a stranger is brave enough to build something real. Some people inherit a life from the person who planned it for them. Those inheritances are sometimes a burden and sometimes a gift, and most often they are both at once. But there are others who inherit the life the person before them did not get to live, not through paper and will, but through blood and silence and the slow building of trust. And by the time they understand what they have inherited, it has already become entirely their own. Iris had come west to marry a man she had never met, and found instead the man who had let her choose to stay. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and took the long road and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you. Out on the high plains of Wyoming, where the wind carries the memory of everything that came before and nothing is ever forgotten, the love between Beck Hollister and Iris found each other not because they were meant to, but because they chose to be. And that choice mattered more than any plan ever could. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to you, follow the Lonesome Trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.